Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the International Affairs Forum at Northwestern Michigan College. I am so glad to have you all with us, and that's including if you're here for the first time. Maybe a quick show of hands, any first-timers here? Well, that's good. That's a great number. Yeah. And then if you've been supporting us all season long, we thank you very much for that support. And maybe you're joining us online or joining us from one of our satellite partners locations. But thank you for choosing to join us tonight. Let's take a moment to greet everyone at one of those satellite partners. Let's do both at the same time. Leland, there's a group at the Old Art Building, and our new friends from the Zonta Club of Rogers City at the Presque Isle District Library over in Rogers City. So let's give them a wave, maybe this camera here. Yeah. Okay, always fun to be connecting all of Northern Michigan together, all of us. So my name is Alex Tank. I have the honor of serving as the director of IAF, and it has been a pleasure and honor to work with our brilliant journalists at Interlochen Public Radio, our event partners for this evening's program. I'm so pleased to have Ed Ronco with us, our news director at IPR. Yeah. And Ed will be in conversation with Sharon Moshavi, president of the International Center for Journalists, or ICFJ. I'm just using that now so we can use that all night. And I've heard it many times today. It's a good acronym. So it's important to acknowledge that tonight we're part of a continuing conversation with a focus on press freedom and journalism. This morning on campus, the IPR team and IAF, we convened a group of Northern Michigan journalists from digital, print, broadcast media, for a rich dialogue on the value of independent journalism and vibrant media ecosystem in the face of a diverse set of challenges right now. It was a great session here on campus. You may have noticed that press freedom has been a pillar of IAF programming for several years, and we owe this focus to a special journalist, a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner, and a friend to many people here, the late Bob Giles. So after a decades-long career in journalism, while enjoying a busy retirement with his wife Nancy, Bob served our community in so many ways, including on the editorial board of the Traverse City Record Eagle and on the board of the International Affairs Forum. He always pushed IAF to cover journalism and press freedom issues as vitally important to our society and our democracy. So we're continuing that tradition tonight, and that is thanks to a generous gift to IAF from Bob and Nancy Giles. So I want to recognize that tremendous generosity and that legacy that Bob and Nancy have left behind them. So thank you. Now, before we get into this discussion, I'd like to give a resounding thanks to our season sponsor for helping make these programs possible in our community. That's Mercantile Bank. So thank you to Mercantile Bank. And I'd also like to thank our business community supporters, Century LLC, Desmond Liggett Wealth Advisors, Nicolay Bank, and Paul M. Schmuckel. And finally, I do a long list of thank yous because I think it's maybe one of the most important things that I do here, which is to thank all of you, our IAF members. You make annual gifts to support this community educational asset, and we can't do it without you. Now is the time to make next season possible during our 32nd season membership drive. So that's happening right now, and to keep this programming vigorous and vital and free for students and educators. That's what you make possible. So you may have received a letter in the mail, or you will quite soon, or maybe you'll get an email, or both of those things, and we're excited about what's on tap for next season, including our 13th annual Academic World Quest program, a reprise of our IAF Student Leadership Team event that we held last month. We'll do that again next year, and a host of thought-provoking programs with expert speakers exploring critical global issues. So thank you to all of our IAF supporting members. You can clap for yourselves, I would say. All right, now a quick reminder to please silence your mobile devices, which I always ask to do, but this time we're not asking you to stow those away because we're looking for your help to inform the discussion here tonight. with some real-time polling. So the poll is not live yet, but you can scan the QR right now, or you can type in that menti.com and enter the code there. And then our moderator and our guests will go through that set of questions together live, and we'll get your input on how you consume news and how you consume media. Okay, while you're doing that, I'm sure I've lost your attention now to your smartphones. That's the story of our lives right now. Here's how we'll run this evening's program. I'll be back up to join you for Q&A after the moderated conversation. For everyone online, you can use Zoom Q&A to submit questions at any time during the event. For everyone in person, you may find question cards circulating around. We'll collect those at the end of the moderated conversation. You can also use our iaf@nmc.edu email. So iaf@nmc.edu. It's also on your program. And that's our preferred method at this point because your penmanship on email is absolutely crystal clear. I love it. Okay, now let's get this dialogue going. I am honored to introduce our moderator for this evening, and he will introduce our guest, Sharon Moshavi. Ed Ronco is the news director for Interlochen Public Radio. He joined IPR in the summer of 2022 after 9 years with KNKX Public Radio in Seattle, Tacoma, Washington, where he was the local host of All Things Considered. He's an experienced reporter, interviewer, and broadcaster whose career has included work in rural Alaska and northern Indiana. Originally from Michigan, Ed is delighted to be back in his home state and at Interlochen no less, which he only ever dreamed of attending as a band and theater kid growing up in Wyandotte. He holds a bachelor's degree in journalism from Michigan State University. Now, please help me welcome to the International Affairs Forum stage Sharon Moshavi and Ed Ronco.
Good evening. This is great. I'm very excited for this conversation, and I want to introduce our guest before we go any further, of course. Everybody needs an edit, so correct me if need be. Sharon Moshavi is president of the International Center for Journalists. The nonprofit organization runs programs for more than 132,000 reporters, editors, and newsrooms around the world. That's staggering to me.
That's over 5 years, just
over 5 years.
Your first fact check.
Still staggering. It helps, the center helps them report on big issues, keep up with things technologically, and find successful business models. Moshavi was an international journalist based in New Delhi, Jerusalem, and Tokyo, and her work has appeared in, among others, the Boston Globe, Newsday, KQED, The New Republic, so many more. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. Thank you all for having me.
You've been in Traverse City for about 24 hours now.
Almost exactly.
And first impressions?
It's really nice.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
I came in with, frankly, no expectations.
Right.
And Alex kept saying, you should see it. You should have some time. And he took me around. We did a little drive today, went to the Farm Club for lunch. Oh, I highly recommend it. I'm not getting a commission. And it's a lovely town, and I am thinking of buying property.
Okay, excellent. We'll see you back here soon then. We do have that survey, and we'll bring, I think, that QR code up if you haven't been in there yet. But what we want to do is go through these questions. I'm going to give you just another minute to get in there before, and I want to ask you a question while we're getting set up. I'm just curious, you know, I'm a journalist. My career has taken paths I did not expect it to take in very happy and wonderful ways. How does someone become the president of ICFJ? What was your path there?
It's a very good question. So I was a journalist for many years. I was an accidental journalist. Frankly, I became a journalist because it was the one job where I didn't have to get to work before 10 a.m. And so that was very attractive at the time. And I found myself, again, happenstance, overseas. That was not something I had anticipated. A number of, life choices led me there. India was the first place I was ever in the world outside Europe, and I was like, wow. And I was covering, it was opening up economically. It was just a fascinating story. I love that. So I ended up spending about 10, 11 years working overseas. When I came back to the US, frankly, I was burnt out on journalism. Daily, I just wasn't compelled. I wound up working at the Knight Foundation. If you know it, it's the largest funder of journalism in the US. And it really got me interested in sort of, as I like to say, journalism at 30,000 feet. What is this thing called journalism? It's transforming. It needed to transform. It still constantly is transforming. And so that led me to ICFJ. You had a previous speaker here who was my boss, Joyce Barnathan. She was actually my editor at Business Week. And I had turned her down for a job in Singapore. And so I think she wanted to hire me because I had turned her down. It's like dating, right? You're more attractive if you say, you turn them down to start. And I really fell in love with it because it allowed me to give back to so many of the journalists that worked and helped me over the years around the world. Like, these are the journalists, this is the sort of little known secret, like not just foreign reporters like myself, but everything you're seeing many places, there's often an international journalist behind the scenes that help get that story to you, and we can talk about some ways that happens. But for me, it was a really exciting opportunity to give back. And then what I really discovered that I loved is that journalism literally changes every 6 months. It's like I was dealing with something new every 6 months, and that dynamism to me is how I became the president of ICFJ, because I was so enamored of it and really am committed to the profession, but also, as we'll talk about, the need for it to change in the face of the information ecosystem we live in now is an enormous, enormous challenge.
It's a special thing to have a job where you show up to work not knowing what you'll learn by the end of the day. I think that's one of the rewarding things about it.
I think that is actually why, too, a lot of people like to go into journalism. But at the same time, journalists don't like change because of that. There was a study done a number of years ago. You move a desk in a newsroom, everybody freaks out.
That's true. I've witnessed that.
See, yeah. There you go.
Yes. Let's go through some of these questions, because these are really interesting things. And we're going to explore a little bit your sensibilities about how journalism happens, where it happens, at what scale it happens. So we're going to bring up the questions, and you can participate in real time. So let's see here. We've got, is that 97 likes on that? 98, great, this is great. All right, let's see this first question if we can. All right, I'm gonna stand up and get a better view here, if you don't mind. Okay, where do you get your news? Choose up to 3. I won't take it personally if radio's not on your list. That's okay.
Pretty much in slow motion, isn't it?
Yeah, look at that. And Sharon, to think that 30 years ago there would be way fewer choices here.
Yes, you actually would have about 3 of these choices. Well, other might have existed, but yes, you would have had TV and radio and print. You did not have websites or apps. Newsletters in theory existed, but they were a very, very different animal. TikTok was a dream in somebody's eye, and podcasts. We were starting to see podcasts. I think when the iPhone was invented in 2007, I believe it came out. Podcasts came out early, but they have morphed very, very dramatically. And oftentimes, the most successful podcasts now are actually video podcasts. The name quite doesn't do it justice anymore.
And it looks like websites and apps coming in first here.
Yeah. So this is interesting because. Wait till let's see. This is a very slow process, isn't it? The news moves faster than this. So I think what's interesting to me here is this is very different than, well, it probably fits your average American. So Pew did a study recently. There have been a number of studies of how many Americans get their news from alternative sources, shall we say. And about a quarter, 20 to 25% of all Americans, their main source of news are influencers. It is social media, somebody that you're following on TikTok or Instagram. But for Americans under 30, there have been a few different studies, that number is anywhere from 40 to 50%. So all of those things that you see at the top, that's probably those numbers in a few years, and in 5, 10 years, that is going to shift dramatically. So this is, I think this fits the demographic of folks here, including myself, but you will see these numbers are going to change dramatically, and they already are starting to change dramatically.
Let's go to the next question. Do you trust most national news outlets? National news outlets. This is going to be like watching tennis.
Oh my God, this is. Okay, let's talk while this happens.
No, this is
like,
cool though. I mean, it's fascinating.
It is, but it's really slow. Sorry. I am used to like
Sharon,
instantaneous.
Well, Sharon, I wonder, do we feel that trust is? Do you have a sense of the increase or decrease of trust in national media?
Trust in media in general is at the bottom of where it's ever been. I think Gallup's been doing this for at least 50 years, and trust in media has never been as low as it is now. And there are a number of factors that you can talk about and analyze. One is that trust in institutions as a whole in the United States are down dramatically. You can also look at, we are a polarized nation. Polarization creates that. You trust your news source, you don't trust the other guys. The other is news avoidance and news fatigue. It's like, what does this get me in my life? Why should I care? I just hear bad news, I'm gonna go do something else. The other thing to note is that trust is worse in the US than many other parts of the world. It's not equally bad everywhere. And I think it correlates often to overall trust in institutions.
Wow. All right, 5.5 seems to be where we've settled. Let's go to the next question. Local news. Do you trust most local news outlets? A little higher right now.
If that doesn't get a lot higher, you guys are doing something wrong here. But I don't think you are. Yeah, no, and that's generally the case, it's interesting too, even, you all turned up to hear, a talk about journalism, and still the amount of trust in journalism in national media is still, it's not as high as you might think. Trust generally is always much higher in local news. It's reporting in your communities. You're much more likely to know the journalist, right? To know the face or the voice in Ed's case. So I think that makes a huge difference. So it is a fundamental problem. The other issue where trust comes in, or lack of trust, is because of the proliferation of places to get your news. It is not clear. There is no Walter Cronkite. You are looking for your own trusted voice that speaks to you. You're in your own ecosystem and bubble that social media sort of feeds to you. News. We less and less seek out news, and more and more it comes to us, and then we sort of decide where to put our attention.
And then there's all those questions about how it gets selected for us, what the algorithms are feeding us. Do we have another question on here? Is that? Yes. Okay. How much of your news do you get from influencers? Social media influencers, I think, is kind of who we're talking about there.
Yes. And just to sort of define our terms, influencers are sort of anybody with, I think there's even a number, 100,000 followers. Most of them are not journalists. Many of them are. About 25% of are quote unquote kind of news creators, people who came from journalism, who have now sort of gone out on their own or are doing their own thing. But by and large, you have lots of people talking about the news. They're not doing their own reporting. They are feeding off, that top layer of TV, print, and radio, and news apps. So that is what's really sort of fundamentally changing.
Do we have one more?
I think that's it.
I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you can see your news consumption patterns, and you can see that has changed. It's changing. I was surprised, actually, that there was as many in this crowd getting news from social media influencers than I might have thought. So it's all it's all ages, it's all demographics. It is changing. Obviously, there are generational differences, but news consumption patterns have completely changed because. I think one of the reasons for that is journalism, as it was sort of constructed in the modern age, was built on a scarcity of information. We are here to tell you what's going on. There is no scarcity of information anymore. On the contrary, we're overloaded by information. This is something I wrote about actually in the Nieman report. Bob Giles used to run the Nieman Center at Harvard. And in this overload, I don't think journalism has found how it operates when your landscape is no longer one of scarcity, but of too much abundance.
It makes me wonder, journalism has a long track record of creating change, of affecting change, whether it's at the community level or globally. Does it still have the might that it once did?
It's a great question, and I hate to say it, but no. I think that the word that keeps coming up a lot recently is relevance. Is journalism relevant, and how do we make it relevant? It's hugely important. I mean, it is a pillar of our democracy, and if it goes away, boy, we will feel it. But for many people, it does not feel relevant to their day-to-day lives, and I don't think we have fully done a good job of grappling with that.
So with all of these information sources out there, and with so much more of the onus on each of us to find our way to them, they're not just news boxes on the corner now. How much of the onus is on we media consumers to know what we're looking at, to discern what we're looking at, and how do we, I guess, how responsible are we for discerning what we're consuming?
We are responsible. Look, we're all individuals. We have individual agency. Schools need to do a better job with civic education, with media literacy. But what I would posit is that in the journalism space, we need to look at ourselves and say, okay, how do we help with this situation, and not just throw up our hands and say it's the platforms, it's up to the audience. So I think that is something that we need to be dealing with. And I see a lot of places doing that. My organization, we work globally around the world, and there are examples, I can think in Venezuela, Brazil, Egypt, Malaysia, where we have done projects that have really sort of built connections between communities and media, and that enriches the media. It builds trust between communities and the media, news media, and I think thinking about community civic engagement is a key role of journalism. It's much easier to do, and I see great, you guys are doing a great work here, it's clear, and it's easier on the local level. So I think that's got to be sort of the first line of defense, but it's getting every part of journalism to be sort of doing it and thinking about who they are serving.
I think the world of American journalism can often believe of itself that we invented this way of reporting the news, and it is our mission to export it to the world so that everyone else may be free. And I think there's some truth in that, and I think American journalism has done a lot of good around the world. I'm curious, how much do we have to give to places that are trying to set up free press establishments, and how much can we learn from places, especially like nascent democracies, as they're starting to build their own free press?
So a few thoughts. So my organization was founded 40 years ago by 3 journalists, and when they did that in the 80s, the goal was to sort of export American journalism. And that was great for a while. But our model has changed because the world has changed. And frankly, at this point, I think we have more to learn from the rest of the world than the world does from us. And I'll explain why. And we're seeing that in real time in some ways. The space for press freedom is as closed as it has ever been globally across the country. The US has fallen in the last couple of years. The Reporters Without Borders does an annual sort of World Press Freedom Index. We are falling. And that is because of a number of factors. It is government, but it's also business models. It's everything that sort of kind of restricts the flow of news and information. So we're falling. I think what we also don't, and I think we're coming from an era where media at one point was fat and happy. Newspapers printed a lot of, paper and a lot of money, and I think that mentality hasn't fully gone. Some of the places that we're working, there are more constraints. There are financial constraints. There are governmental and authoritarian constraints. There are safety constraints. Safety is starting to be an issue here. We can talk about that in a minute. But what you're seeing, and I do think that constraints breed creativity. And so what we're seeing, whether it comes to AI or really interesting ways to engage citizens, or numerous sort of inventive models, I feel like we're seeing a lot of really interesting things happening globally. And one of the things that my organization, we try to do is build those connections between US journalists and international journalists. And we held a roundtable in February with these different communities together. And it was pretty eye-opening, I think, for the American journalists to see how much, especially now, in the current context we're in, for them to see what they had to learn from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I've put my phone on the table here just to keep track of time so we have time for questions. I have 700,000 questions for you, so I'm going to limit myself to a time post here. But we talk about safety, and I think that's a big word. I hear it on one level as feeling safe enough to report what you want, whether that's through policy or economically or, culturally within your community. And then on a very literal level, being safe from physical harm to report what you want. So when there's an attack on press freedom, whether it's through policy or through a literal attack, what is your organization's role in responding to that? That's my first question, I guess. My second would be more broadly, how should we all take that? What should the world do about that?
It's a very hard thing because safety used to be, oh, I need a flak jacket. I'm going to a war zone, and that has in the U.S. and that has changed considerably. The biggest threats, and this is where we're doing a lot of work is in digital safety. There are harassment, there are threats, and we've done a research study about women journalists globally, and 1 in 5 of those digital threats turn into real-world threats. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're working with a university in the UK to develop what we call an early warning system, which will help track the indicators of these online attacks and whether they're likely to lead to real-world violence. So you can help prepare and know what's coming, because that's a lot of what happens. It's also, all of these digital attacks have another implication. They are chilling. They push a lot of journalists out of the space, especially women who get attacked more than anybody. So that's something that we're working on too, providing safety tools, mental health resources and things. The other thing we're doing is investigations into who's behind attacks. A lot of these digital attacks are coming from governments or political actors. And often there is, one in particular, we work with Maria Ressa, the Nobel Peace Prize winner in the Philippines. She's on our board of directors as well. And we've been analyzing the attacks against her. She's had, I don't know if you're familiar with her, she's had a number of cases. She has had a number of threats and cases against her in the Philippines. And what we've done is been able to track sort of the confluence between the online attacks and the legal attacks. And they are timed to each other. So they're not just happening, they're coordinated. She took that information, that was part of her Nobel Peace Prize packet, which we were very excited about. So, that kind of understanding what's happening is the first step to being able to do things. And a lot of the journalists that we work with, and we've done case studies of women journalists all around the world, who've been had attacks in Brazil and in the UK and lots of other countries. And understanding they're not crazy, then this is a thing, is important. And so it's giving them more agency, and their news organizations more agency to try to fight back.
Do you find that attacks on the press, do they influence the way the public sees the press?
Absolutely. And that's one of when we talk about trust. So what a lot of the attacks against journalists are designed to do, they're designed to silence journalists. They are designed to intimidate journalists. And a lot of these are coordinated. These attacks are also come in the form of coordinated disinformation attacks, weaponized information. And the goal of that is to affect the credibility of the journalist. So it is deeply, deeply tied to public trust in journalism. So the more attacks you have, the media, all of these things, it has a deep, deep effect on trust in journalism.
I wonder, okay, so we've been talking about some pretty serious things here, obviously. When you look at the world stage or here in the US, what are the things that excite you and give you hope for the future of a free press, for the future of the free flow of accurate information? Who are your celebratory cases out there? Who excites you?
What excites me is actually a lot of what I saw this morning are people doing this this is not a well-paying profession. This is not, and increasingly it is not a particularly vaunted profession. Increasingly, because the business models have collapsed because of, we can go into that if you want, but the financial models for journalism are basically gone. And so we're trying to reinvent new models. And what excites me about that is that it's giving the opportunity for so many people to start something. And we're seeing an increase of what I call micromedia, 1, 2, 3. It's sort of the next step from the influencer or news creator. And they want to produce news. And I think that is really exciting. I do think that is sort of more of the future of news. We'll have some big at the top, but a lot of small ones, niche, serving specific communities. And one of the things my organization is working to do, and this is what is exciting me right now, is we have some partnerships we developed with organizations in South Africa and India to develop what I call critical infrastructure. So it's the AI tools, it is the forensic analysis to investigate disinformation, it is the safety tools, because nobody's going to have the resources to do that on their own. But we need to have great journalism happening, and we need to have great journalism that connects with people happening like that. And I see more experiments like that. And journalism has not always been so great as experimenting, and I think that's the role of an organization like ours, is we provide a place for people to try things. Because if we don't try new things, we are dead.
I'm a mid-career journalist, and one of the great surprises of this phase of my career has been working with a younger staff who are earlier in their careers, who just astonish me every day with their intelligence and their commitment to what they're doing, but also their sort of zeal for getting the story out, their hunger for serving the community in a really altruistic way. Do you see that happening around the world?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a couple of examples actually here in the US, because we just did an event in New York last week with 2, I'll call them news creators, because they're journalists who basically turn to have YouTube channels now. And they recognize that they have to actually they want to partner with news organizations. But what they're really good at, and they're young, is connecting with that audience. They are a voice, they exchange, they recognize. I think a lot of people pay lip service to we can no longer be the voice of God and broadcast down to the masses. But I see younger folks really actually living that, and that to me I find very encouraging.
I have one more question before I think we're almost ready to open it up, and it is this. This is a question I ask my reporters a lot when we're editing a story, and it's sort of a fancy version of so what, which is if somebody's hearing your story, what are they supposed to do about the information you've just told them? And I think I have the same question about our conversation tonight. Those of us who care about a healthy and a vibrant and a free media ecosystem, what are the things we can do if we don't work in journalism, if we're not those folks?
3 very simple words: pay for news. If you do nothing else, I had a very rich friend, as an aside, who was gleefully told me that he was getting the Washington Post for free because he would just clear his cache and they wouldn't know it was him coming back. And I'm barely speaking to him anymore. But no, seriously, that is the one thing you can do, is pay for news. It is pay for news. That is the most important thing, because that is also where, that's where the breaks. That's where news becomes more fragile too. That's where it becomes, a lot of the pressures on news and journalists often come because of the financial. There are ways to go at the financial model. In many of the countries we work in, Kenya is a great example. Kenya is a democracy that's kind of closing. And the government used to advertise in a lot of newspapers, tenders and all kinds of normal things, because they run a lot of the companies too. They don't like it, they're shutting down the advertising. And so there's always ways for folks to sort of come at the press financially. So I would say pay for news and speak up for journalists. If you see something, say something, I as well too. I think it's, journalists are people too, and I think all too often the media, everything gets lumped into the media, and I think people forget that. I think every journalist I know, and then I'll shut up, got into this business because they wanted to make the world a better place. I don't know of a single journalist who that was not their motivating factor.
I did it for fame.
Thank you very much, Sharon and Ed. And Ed, I have to compliment your timeliness. You know how to hit the post, right? So we'll continue the conversation with some questions from our audience, from online. If you're online, you can use the Zoom Q&A function. If you're here in the audience or online, you can email iaf@nmc.edu. And we'll start with one question, kind of an extension of the poll. So that was a fun experiment. And the one question was, what would you say you might see, and I'll sort of interpret the question, if asked the question, how much do you trust or get news from international outlets? We didn't put that on there. So I guess not the trust question, but how much news do you get from international outlets? What would your Pew research show, or is that only a national survey?
I don't think they've asked the question. I don't think, I mean, other than, the people going to the Daily Mail website to see whatever, Harry and Meghan are up to, I think that's most of it. The Guardian, I think the exception, and they have a huge, the Guardian, the FT, which have huge news bureaus, but I don't think that's a question they would even think to ask.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll go to a question online. And Betty asked, you said the future is in producing news, and how does that compare to reporting the news? Producing versus reporting, was there a nuance there?
I think what I was trying to say is it's reporting is expensive. It needs to be done. We need to support it. But the other piece, it's not about producing, it's about distributing, I would say. That's the distinction that I would make if I misspoke before. That last mile from the news to the audience is the piece that is the piece of the puzzle that needs to be figured out in much better and more creative ways.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing to your last question about international? One thing just to remind folks or let folks know about. We work a lot with what I call diaspora media, a lot of local, Spanish language, other communities who have come here. And increasingly, there are a lot of exile journalists who are being, as I said, press freedom is closing in many spaces. We're supporting a Cuban journalist, a Venezuelan journalist, Russian journalists, and they are increasingly reporting for U.S. communities, in their local language. That's become an incredibly important news source, and I think the U.S. as a home to exile journalists, which is in danger now, is something that I think is just really important, and I wanted to mention that.
Okay. I like this question from Linda. It's, does your organization support journalists who have left traditional outlets and are now writing on Substack, I think, as an example, so the diversity now in all the different channels we have?
Absolutely. As I like to say, that the definition of a journalist has expanded, and there are lots of folks committing journalism. And so we absolutely, that's a key area for us, is increasingly supporting the individual journalist, the two people who've come together, one person. I think we need to recognize that is where our news ecosystem in many ways is headed, and connecting those folks with folks like Interlochen, people who are doing great reporting. It needs to be an ecosystem that feeds each other.
Okay. This question might take some air out of the room, but it's from Janet. It's a good question. How does AI challenge the financial future of journalism? And this came up this morning in our session with local journalists.
And I could do a whole session on AI, but I will try to be brief here. So AI presents a lot of opportunity for journalists, which I can go into if you're interested in, but on the threat, it's a huge threat. I think it is going to make the internet look like a walk in the park for news organizations, but that was what sort of killed the business model to begin with. Now you have AI summaries, which I'm sure we all look at the top when we do a Google search. So click-through rates through Google search and places have gone down, and Google search is a way a lot of news organizations get their views. There's no financial compensation for the content. It's crawling websites, except for the very large organizations who have contracts with them, the AP, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times is probably about to do one as well. So it is a huge, 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 huge threat. And this is something where, again, the industry, I do fear that is not doing enough to address that head on.
We had a little chat about this earlier about investigative journalism being the kind of surviving mode that may not be as deeply affected, but you mentioned that you thought efficiency would just increase in that.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's going to make news cheaper. And to quote someone, a reporter I know is, "I'm not here to save journalists. I'm here to save journalism." So to my mind, and I agree with that, this is not, sorry, Ed, this is not about saving people's jobs. This is about, we need good journalism if we're going to be a thriving democracy. And so it does create efficiencies, huge efficiencies. The other thing that it does that I think is what's really exciting is that in investigative journalism, it makes investigative journalism much more feasible, and it makes it cheaper. You can search huge, huge amounts of documents in like 3 seconds through an AI tool. You can find patterns and things you never could find before. It is a great investigative tool. The Nieman Lab, I think it was the Nieman Lab, there was just a story out about the Pulitzer Prize winners for this year, and it looked at how AI was used in all of the winning stories. And the writer said, I expected to find, ChatGPT everywhere, it's Gen AI. And it wasn't. It was all kinds of fascinating, interesting things, deep technical support that made these projects possible. And I think that, to me, is exciting. But we've got to have a financially sustainable journalism. You can have the best journalism in the world, and if you don't have any money to support it, it ain't going to last.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Ken in the audience. How do you, as a journalist, think about and as president of your organization deal with self-appointed, quote, journalists who are driven exclusively by political agendas, pronouncing their own, quote, facts and interpretations that have no basis in reality?
Yeah. Look, in the conversation today with a room full of journalists, we talked about, in many ways, we live in a post-fact world. And so, nobody can be sort of the fact police. And sort of say your journalism is good, yours is bad. There are efforts to whitelist different organizations, which I do think in some ways can work, but I also think it's challenging. So I have absolutely no good answer to that question, other than to say that I do think we need to recognize that, going back to your media literacy question, we need to do a better job of the great journalism, getting people to buy into that, to why should you trust me, to be trustworthy, because we're not going to get rid of the slop, but we need to compete against the slop. I mean, when you think about it, journalists are competing against everything. The attention economy is huge. You're not just competing against other news outlets, you're competing against Netflix and the cute cat video and all of these things. And so you basically need to, horrible phrase, you need to sell your product. And so frankly, what a lot of folks in, partisans or folks who don't necessarily traffic in facts do, they're very good at engaging questions, or engaging audiences, I should say. And, it's interesting, there's been a lot of studies around we do a lot of work around combating Russian disinformation, Russian information warfare. We've supported a lot of projects around the world on that. And that, to me, is really interesting because they do a really good job. And so a lot of the efforts to come back, they're really good storytellers. And so there's actually something to be learned from the bad actors as well, too. What are you doing right that we can steal?
Interesting. Okay, another question from the in-person audience. The in-person audience is overwhelmingly more engaged than online, so I'd encourage online folks to pepper us with some questions. We're getting to lots of good answers. So with your global perspective, you have access to examples and anecdotes from journalists all over the world. So any more examples of what American journalists have to learn from international journalists, as you mentioned earlier? Any other examples to share?
I think one thing that's important for journalists and for audiences to recognize is that what global journalists are doing, as I mentioned briefly before, it's really important for us. And I'll give a couple of examples on that. One is an amazing journalist that we're supporting. He's Nigerian. He covers the Wagner Group, if you remember those. They're the Russian paramilitary group. And he has covered them. He's gone into the toughest parts of West Africa. He reports for a few different outlets, including the Daily Beast, but mostly international outlets. And he single-handedly knows more about the Wagner Group's activities than I think anybody. And, you know, it's important, too, because the Wagner Group is there, because they are basically getting the minerals. They're in the mines in the Congo and other places, and that is helping feed their war, support the war, pay for the war in Ukraine. And that information that he's getting out of there is hugely important, and it's feeding a lot of the journalism here. Another example I will give is a Russian, one of the Russian exiles I mentioned. It's a great organization called iStories that we've been supporting. We incubated it, and they're doing great on their own. Their journalists have all had to leave Russia. We helped them get out. They're in various parts of the world. And because they are Russian, they have great tentacles into the Russian troops inside Ukraine. And so their coverage of what's actually happening on the ground from the Russian side in Ukraine has been huge. And I see that, you know, so many news organizations are matching that information or going to them for information. That kind of stuff is extraordinary. And I say those as two examples because it's a story we're all, you know, very paying much attention to. And I think that's huge. And the other thing I will say is just how you operate in environments. You know, to be candid, we did this session I referred to with international journalists in U.S. There was a lot of talk about data disappearing from websites. We're starting to see that now, right? It's gone. And an Argentinian journalist who we've been working with, and she's actually doing a lot of work with Spanish language media in the U.S. now, she said, basically, you idiots. She said, before any administration changes, she said, we have a coalition, we scrape everything. We save everything. She's like, why didn't you talk to me? And, you know, and so that kind of thing to understand, you know, how you do, you know, operate in certain environments, I think is extremely important, and it's become more important than ever.
Okay, my prompting for the online questions worked. So I have an online question from Lori. If more and more news reporters are leaving the newsroom, how will these stories be vetted without a newsroom copy editor to look at the story for missing connections or errors? So kind of a fact-checking question of rigorousness, maybe.
No, I mean, and this is what makes journalism. I mean, journalism doesn't require just rigorousness; it requires admitting when you're wrong, and that is the definition of, in my mind, real journalism. And so that's where I would separate the wheat from the chaff. I think that is an issue. I mean, I don't know how many copy edit mistakes I see now that I never used to see before. So I don't know, Ed, if you want to talk about that too. But I mean, journalism, where everybody's doing less with more, and I think the answer in many ways is collaboration. You can't do everything on your own, and so bringing in other players. There's a lot more, this Press Forward initiative that is a national initiative, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It's a coalition. It's support for local media here. There's a chapter in the region here, and it's really built on collaboration, which I think is fantastic. So that's one way that you do it. I think that's hugely important going forward.
I'll just add, collaboration has been very important for us at the local level. IPR right now is working with Bridge, Michigan, and piloting an effort to do more work together and use both of our resources, and then bring other journalists from northern Michigan into that as well, in the hopes of expanding not only the scope of the stories we tell, but the amount of stories we tell and how many places we can distribute it. And it is no longer the situation where we're all rushing to the phone booth at the same time to try to beat each other. It is us calling each other and saying, well, I have this piece of the story and you have that piece of the story, and can we put that into one story and get it in front of as many people as possible?
And I think, and it's sort of making those connections too. There are things happening that are on a bigger scale. We're supporting now a collaboration of journalists in multiple places looking at disinformation campaigns around climate change. And what they're discovering is a lot of the countries going to COP, going to the, in Brazil, but a lot of countries that are sort of making a lot of claims about they're doing all of this. There's a lot of greenwashing, and they're not just greenwashing, but they're actively trying to hurt it on the other side. And so we are now seeing patterns. We're seeing a lot of it's happening from the Gulf states in the Middle East, for example, and we're seeing other places where it's happening. And so you start to see the bigger picture as well, too. I think we always think, oh, this is one small thing, and invariably, the world is a very globalized place. Information spreads in 3 seconds, and we need to be able to respond to that ability.
Thank you. I have a combined question here from our group in Rogers City, but also a question from the in-person audience. Same question, worded differently. Can you comment on the death of Voice of America? How relevant is it to journalism? That's one phrasing, and I'll read you the other one because I think the contrast is interesting. What is your opinion on the changes in Voice of America, and how will it affect the world?
So it's just to clarify. So the Voice of America, there's also there are sister networks, which is Radio Free Europe and Radio Free Asia. I do think it is a shame. They actually do great journalism, and they're trusted. I mean, and they do it in multiple languages that nobody else can afford to do. The reach has been huge. We supported we worked with the AP on a story last year around sort of a disinformation campaign targeted at migrants, really tricking migrants to come to the southern border. And it was it had enormous impact, and there were protests outside the embassy in Tijuana. It really had a lot of impact. And out of that, Voice of America teamed up with the Mexican reporters. They were part of a team to develop a weekly show about migration and about the sort of the ruses that were being used to bring you to the U.S. That show reached 60 million people a week. And so, that had huge impact. And I think the kind of impact we want to see. So I think it actually did a lot of good in the world. The other thing I will say is what worries me a lot, I think mostly, and I was talking to the general counsel for Radio Free Asia last week, a lot of the journalists who work for these outlets, a lot of them are here in the US, a lot of them have fled and been persecuted in their own countries. Their visas now are mostly all going to be pulled away, and so they can't safely go back. And so there's going to be a very human cost as well, and I know a lot of these journalists, it's pretty heartbreaking.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to our other satellite partners in Leland at the old art building. And this question's from George. Given leadership in the U.S., which can, quote, intimidate and encourage, quote, retribution, what roles can we as consumers rally around? And what roles can the press play to call out the intimidators?
I think, are we talking about intimidating the media or intimidating?
I think so.
So I think that is a challenge right now. I think in candor, the first Trump administration, there was a lot of pushback, and I think media felt that they were pegged as the resistance, and didn't want to be, didn't mean to be, but we like facts, and so it became a little hard. And with this administration, I think there are a few things going on. I think people don't want to be positioned as seen as that. Half of America, voted for this administration, and so really, I think bending over backwards to really sort of, report what is happening. But at the same time, which is challenging, the media itself is being very intimidated, and this is where corporate ownership has not exactly been a beacon of inspiration in some, and I will not name names, but as some of you may know who they are, there's been, because their business interests are being challenged. So I think it is incumbent, and this is the trick, journalists, this is where I think my organization and organizations in the media support business play a role, because it's very hard for journalists to speak up. But communities can speak up. The intimidation of media, the intimidation of journalists is a true, tried and tested mechanism, and we've seen it happening increasingly at the local level too. It's not only a national issue. It has become, people have become emboldened. There was a couple of years ago, an investigative reporter in Las Vegas was killed. There have been, newsrooms have been, their computers have been taken out in Kentucky, New Hampshire. There was a big thing. This is happening everywhere, so it's happening in local communities too. And it really is important that communities speak out about it. So it can't only be left to certain groups. It's got to be, and I think that's what we've been learning too, is people have to have each other's backs. There's got to be some solidarity when things happen.
Okay, we have time for a couple more. I'm going to go to one from in-person, from Jason. To protect democracy, how do we as a society get people to venture outside of their news bubbles? Earlier we were talking about the echo chamber that we
were talking about that.
Yeah.
I would start, this is where I think we can all start at home. Seek out some news you don't normally like, the other side. Try to understand what the thinking is. I make a conscious effort to read certain things that I probably would not just in my personal perspectives. And I do find that it helps me think, I understand other perspectives more. So I think we each have to do that and then share that with your, does anybody remember the Breck commercial? I told 2 friends and they told 2 friends. And I think, if we all start to do that and then talk about that and to our like-minded friends and say, hey, check this out, check this news source out. I think that's the way we can do it. It's got to be sort of that kind of person-to-person connection. Because your platforms are not going to steer you into new and expansive ways.
Thank you. Okay, I've got two more questions, and I'm going to put quotes around positive questions. Okay, so can you give examples of groups or people keeping free press free to give us some hope? That was the tagline there.
Yeah, I mean, there's lawyers. I love lawyers these days. There's a group called the Reporters Committee to Protect Journalists. There's the Committee to Protect Journalists. I think the most important thing right now is the lawyers. We have a group at ICFJ we have a legal advisory committee, and that is made up of media freedom lawyers, First Amendment lawyers, working independently, working at large news organizations. There are a lot of folks doing a lot of work. There are a lot of lawyers doing a lot of pro bono work. There is, I think all of these things are really, really important. So there are a lot of people working on this. What I think is important is we need to go beyond the journalism space. And it's got to be other civic actors, other civic groups who take up the cause. Because I do think it is when journalists are the only ones sort of saying, hey, us, I don't think people listen as much, frankly.
I have to give credit. That last question was from Terry. Okay, a good question. One more question. I think this will give us insight into you, Sharon, as a person, not just a journalist. Is there a cure? This is from Ed. Is there a cure for news fatigue? And this, I think we can get into. What do you do when you have too much news?
So I'm going to put this on the journalists, and I talked about this a bit this morning. So this is where I think we need to be fundamentally changing things. People want to make sense of the world. They want actionable news and information. And I think that we, as an industry, need to be much more aware of that and actually do something about that. It's not about activism. It's about taking something and saying, okay, you read this. Here's the number. Or if you want to, reach out to any of these organizations, or you want to, talk to your local congressman or whatever. Here are the numbers. Here's the email address. Whatever it is, whatever side of an issue you're on. And I think part of the research into news fatigue comes a lot from people holding up their hands and saying, what do I do about it? So it is, and the other thing is, and I do it too as a person. I mean, journalists get news fatigue too. I can't tell you how many journalists are like, I'm not doing this. There's a lot of news avoidance as well. You know, it's set times. I would say don't completely disengage, but do it at set times. Don't do it right before you go to bed and get agitated. is my personal advice. I'm trying to live that. So I think that's important. But like I said, I think it's incumbent upon journalists, and this is an area that we're working on a lot, is how do we take that and create sort of actionable information.
So you're saying don't kill your TV.
Actually, your TV I would kill.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not my husband likes to watch CNN, and he watches all of them. You know, it's good. He taste tests for me. But I think, I should be quiet because some of these people fund us. But no, but I do think part of the problem with TV is that people, and I said this morning, people associate, when they say the media, I think they're thinking about a couple of screaming talking heads on MSNBC or something. And, what you're doing is not remotely that, but you get sort of pasted in with that brush, or, and that I think becomes a problem for journalism. So I don't know. I personally like a good news, read a news site, listen to a podcast, watch a video, things that are sort of longer, more insightful. It's very easy to get riled up.
I think there are ways journalists can contribute to that too. There's a model of journalism I find very exciting called solutions journalism. It's hard to do right, but the idea is, instead of saying, here's the problem, you say, here's the problem, here's who's working to fix it, here's a solution in a different place, can it work here in the place I cover? And it gives the audience so much more agency, and it also gives your local officials so much more accountability, because you can say, well, they did it in Pittsburgh, why can't we do it here? So I think that's I would like to see more reporting go in that direction.
I agree, but in true journalistic fashion, people argue about it. The Europeans call it constructive journalism, and I've literally had people like having a heated debate about the difference between the two, which nobody here would be remotely interested in, but yeah.
Well, I think we can all agree we brought two excellent voices here to the stage, and want to thank Sharon and Ed. So I will leave a few moments for some closing remarks if you want to add anything more. Before that, some very rapid thanks to our all-volunteer IAF Advisory Board, the folks at the Dennos Museum Center, our NMC Foundation, all our supporting members. There were 450 plus of you this year. We're hoping to increase that number for next season, and now's the time to do it. You can find information on the program. You can email me. You can go to the website, tciaf.com, and we look forward to your support for next year for our 32nd season of the International Affairs Forum. And quick preview of next up, we've got June 12th with the Consuls General of Mexico and Canada here together with us talking about trade relations, trade dynamics. It's going to be a very interesting discussion, and a special bonus for members. You'll get an invite to purchase a ticket for lunch with our partner for that event on June 12th. We'll partner with the Economic Club of Traverse City for a lunch on June 13th at the Haggerty Center. And members should watch out for that invite and grab a ticket and join us for lunch. It should be a very interesting two-part, in-depth discussion. Until we see you then, encourage you to bring a friend as often as you'd like. Tell folks about it, like the Breck commercial, right? Tell two people, tell two more people. And we look forward to your support next year and continuing this great educational platform to help us learn more, be better engaged, and keep our commitment to lifelong learning. And now I will turn it over to Ed and Sharon for final remarks.
Well, I'm going to go first because I don't want to follow you. It was like thank you, Alex, for inviting me to do this tonight. This has been a wonderful night for me to just learn from you. And I would just encourage all of us to consume journalism, pay for journalism, but also to sort of embrace the idea of discovery, right? That there's so many stories to tell out there. There's so many voices to hear from. And turn that on your local news organizations too. If you read something or you see a story and you don't like the way it's covered or you don't understand, talk to those news outlets. The ones that are worth their salt will talk to you back, and they will answer your questions and help you understand the kind of work they're doing, and that dialogue can only help us be better journalists. So that would be my encouragement. Just embrace that discovery.
That's great, and I wholeheartedly agree. And first, thank you, Alex and Ed, this was a great discussion, and thank you all for coming out. It's nice to see you and to be here. I think that my final remarks are, since this is the International Affairs Forum, I will reference the rest of the world. I think that we do have so much to learn from the rest of the world, and I think a lot of you are here because you believe that. And I think, so I encourage folks as well to, to consume news about the rest of the world, places that you don't necessarily know much about. I think it is really important to understand the world. And there's such great journalism being produced in so many difficult environments. And again, as I said before, it is really, global has an effect on local. That, factory in China has an effect here, or whatever it is. As we know this from the whole tariff discussion. We are deeply intertwined. And I think that richness of both, understanding what's happening locally, nationally, internationally, is something that journalism brings. It used to come in one single newspaper. We had it all in one place, and we don't anymore. So not only do we have to seek out a diversity of voices and perspectives, but these different kinds of issues too. So I would just encourage folks to really sort of, open up your minds and your browsers and your mobile phones, and consume journalism and pay for journalism that you might not otherwise look at. It will enrich your world.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Ed. And thank you to our event partners, Interlochen Public Radio. And thank you all. Good evening.